The autumn afternoon painted Riverside Park in shades of gold and amber, with leaves drifting lazily from oak trees and settling on the winding gravel paths. The air held that crisp quality unique to late fall, when summer's warmth had finally surrendered to the approaching winter, but the cold hadn't yet grown harsh enough to drive people indoors. Near the small duck pond, where benches faced the water and families often gathered for weekend picnics, a colorful blanket was spread across the grass. 6-year-old Olivia Martinez knelt beside it, her blonde hair tied in two neat pigtails that bounced as she carefully arranged plastic containers and napkins, with the serious concentration that children bring to important tasks. Her mother, Carmen, watched with a gentle smile as Olivia organized their simple dinner with methodical precision. Carmen worked as a receptionist at a dental office, and their budget didn't allow for restaurant meals or elaborate outings. But Saturday picnics in the park had become their special tradition, a way to make an ordinary dinner feel like an adventure. "Mama, did I put the sandwiches in the right place?" Olivia asked, looking up with bright blue eyes that seemed to see wonder in everything around her. "Perfect, mija," Carmen replied, settling onto the blanket beside her daughter. "You're getting very good at setting up our picnics." The park was quiet that evening, with only a few joggers passing by and an elderly woman feeding ducks near the water's edge. But Olivia's attention was drawn to a figure sitting alone on a stone bench about 30 feet away. The man looked to be in his 70s with white hair that had grown long and unkempt, and a gray beard that showed he'd been without proper grooming for some time. His clothes were clean but worn, a faded blue jacket that had seen better days, pants that were too big for his thin frame, and shoes that had been resoled more than once. He sat perfectly still, staring out at the pond with an expression that seemed to carry the weight of years. There was something about his stillness that caught Olivia's attention. While other people in the park moved with purpose, walking their dogs, pushing strollers, heading somewhere specific, this man simply sat, as if he had nowhere else to go and no one waiting for him. "Mama," Olivia whispered, tugging gently on Carmen's sleeve. "Why does that man look so sad?" Carmen followed her daughter's gaze and noticed the solitary figure for the first time. Her heart tightened as she recognized the signs she'd learned to spot during her own family's difficult years. The careful stillness of someone trying not to draw attention, the thin frame that spoke of missed meals, the worn clothes that were maintained with dignity despite their age. "I don't know, sweetheart," Carmen said softly. "Maybe he's just thinking about something important." Olivia studied the man for a long moment, her 6-year-old mind processing what she saw with the straightforward compassion that hadn't yet been complicated by adult concerns about strangers and social boundaries. "He looks hungry," she announced with the matter-of-fact observation that children make when they see something adults might overlook or choose to ignore. Carmen glanced at their modest spread: peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, apple slices, a thermos of milk, and homemade cookies that Olivia had helped bake the night before. It wasn't much, but it was enough to share, and Carmen had raised her daughter to understand that having enough meant you had enough to give to others. "What do you think we should do about that?" Carmen asked, curious to see how her daughter's natural empathy would guide her. Olivia didn't hesitate. She stood up, brushed imaginary crumbs from her flower print dress, and looked at her mother with the determined expression she wore when she'd made an important decision. "I'm going to ask him to eat with us," she said simply. Before Carmen could respond, Olivia was already walking across the grass toward the bench where the man sat. Carmen watched, her heart filling with both pride and protective concern, as her small daughter approached the stranger with the fearless kindness that seemed to come naturally to her. The man, Henry, though Olivia didn't know his name yet, looked up in surprise as the little girl stopped directly in front of him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The weathered man who had given up on expecting kindness from the world, and the 6-year-old who couldn't imagine a world without it. "Excuse me, mister," Olivia said in her clear, sweet voice. "Do you want to have dinner with us?" Henry's expression changed slowly, as if he were trying to process words in a language he'd forgotten how to speak. His eyes, which had been dull with resignation just moments before, suddenly filled with tears that he couldn't hide or explain. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, Henry couldn't find his voice. He stared at the small girl who had just offered him something more precious than food. She had offered him recognition, inclusion, the simple acknowledgement that he existed and mattered. Where are you watching this video right now? At home? In a park? Or during your break? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing from each and every one of you. 3 years earlier, Henry Whitman had been standing in front of a third-grade classroom at Riverside Elementary School, helping 8-year-old Marcus sound out the word butterfly during reading time. At 67, Henry had been teaching for 42 years, and his gentle patience with struggling readers had made him beloved by generations of students and their families. His life had been simple but fulfilling. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom house with his wife Eleanor, who had retired from nursing the previous year, and their daughter Lisa visited every Sunday with her twin boys, aged 10 and 12. Henry's greatest joy was watching his grandsons discover the same love of learning that had driven his entire career. But life has a way of unraveling even the most carefully woven existence in a matter of moments. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Eleanor had been driving home from her book club when a drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection near their house. The impact was instant and fatal. Henry received the call while grading spelling tests at his kitchen table, the same table where he and Eleanor had shared breakfast that morning, planning their weekend trip to visit Lisa and the boys. The grief was devastating, but it was only the beginning of Henry's losses. 2 months after Eleanor's funeral, Lisa was offered a promotion that required her family to relocate across the country. Still reeling from losing his wife, Henry encouraged his daughter to take the opportunity, insisting that she shouldn't sacrifice her career to stay close to a heartbroken old man. "Dad, I can't leave you alone like this," Lisa had said, tears in her eyes as she sat in the living room where Henry and Eleanor had entertained family for decades. "You have to live your life, sweetheart," Henry had replied, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "Your mother would want you to take this chance. I'll be fine." But Henry wasn't fine. 6 months after losing Eleanor, he began experiencing the early symptoms of what his doctor diagnosed as Parkinson's disease. The tremor in his left hand was subtle at first, but it gradually worsened, affecting his ability to write on the blackboard and manage classroom activities with his usual confidence. The school district was understanding but practical. They offered Henry early retirement with a reduced pension, suggesting that his health condition made continuing in the classroom inadvisable. Henry accepted, partly because he genuinely struggled with the physical demands of teaching, but mostly because he had lost the heart for work that had once been his passion. The financial realities became apparent quickly. Henry's pension, combined with Eleanor's modest life insurance payout, wasn't enough to maintain the house they lived in for 30 years. Property taxes had increased significantly, and the medical costs associated with managing his Parkinson's consumed a growing portion of his fixed income. Henry sold the house and moved to a small apartment, but even that became unaffordable when his condition worsened and required expensive medications. He applied for additional assistance programs, but found himself caught in the bureaucratic maze that often traps elderly people who are too proud to ask for help and too overwhelmed to navigate complex systems effectively. The final blow came when Henry fell in his apartment and spent 3 days on the floor before his neighbor found him. The emergency room visit, followed by a brief hospital stay, consumed the last of his savings. Unable to afford rent and increasingly unable to care for himself independently, Henry made the decision that would have been unthinkable just 2 years earlier. He packed his few remaining possessions into a single suitcase and began living on the streets. Henry wasn't like the younger homeless individuals who sometimes gathered in more visible parts of the city. He was quiet, clean when possible, and careful not to cause trouble or draw attention. He found shelter wherever he could, park benches when the weather was mild, doorways of closed businesses during rain, and occasionally the public library during the day when he needed warmth and a place to rest. The most painful part wasn't the physical discomfort or the constant uncertainty about food and shelter. It was the invisibility. After 4 decades of being respected as an educator, Henry had become someone that people looked through rather than at. Children who might once have been his students now walked past without seeing him. Parents hurried by with averted eyes. The world had decided he no longer mattered. Carmen Martinez and Olivia were having their Saturday picnic in the same park where Henry spent most of his days because it was one of the few places where he felt safe and unwatched. He had been sitting on that particular bench for 2 hours, Watching families enjoy time together and remembering Sunday dinners with Lisa and the boys, when a 6-year-old girl with pigtails and an enormous heart had walked over and reminded him that he was still human. Carmen had recognized immediately what her daughter was doing, and her own experiences with financial struggle had taught her that dignity mattered more than pride. After her divorce 3 years earlier, she and Olivia had lived for 6 months in her sister's garage apartment, relying on food banks and community support to survive, while Carmen completed her certification to work as a medical receptionist. She understood what it meant to be hungry, and she understood what it meant to be grateful for unexpected kindness. The sight of 6-year-old Olivia leading a homeless man by the hand toward their picnic blanket created a moment that seemed to pause time itself. Carmen watched her daughter's natural compassion unfold, feeling a mixture of maternal pride and protective anxiety. "Mama, this is Mr. Henry," Olivia announced with the formal politeness she'd been taught. "He's going to have dinner with us." Henry stood awkwardly at the edge of their blanket, his eyes still glistening with unshed tears. "Ma'am, I don't want to impose. Your daughter is very kind, but I understand if—" "Please," Carmen interrupted gently, gesturing to a spot on the blanket. "Olivia's right. We have plenty, and we'd be honored to share our dinner with you." As Henry slowly lowered himself onto the blanket, his movements careful due to the tremor in his hands, Olivia immediately began serving him with the same methodical care she'd shown in setting up their picnic. "Do you like peanut butter and jelly?" she asked seriously. "Mama makes them with strawberry jam, which is the best kind, and these cookies have chocolate chips because chocolate makes everything better." Henry accepted the sandwich with trembling hands, and when he took his first bite, Carmen saw him close his eyes briefly, as if savoring not just the food, but the simple act of sharing a meal with others. "Thank you," he whispered. "I can't remember the last time someone invited me to dinner." As they ate, Olivia chattered naturally about her favorite things. Her stuffed elephant named Peanut, the story her teacher had read that morning about a brave mouse, and her plans to learn how to ride a bicycle without training wheels. Henry listened with the attention of someone who had spent decades working with children, asking gentle questions that encouraged Olivia to elaborate on her stories. "You're a very good listener," Carmen observed. "Do you have children?" "I was a teacher," Henry said quietly. "Third grade for 42 years. I have a daughter and 2 grandsons, but they live far away now." Carmen heard the careful way he spoke about his family, recognizing the tone of someone who didn't want to burden others with the full story of their losses. Their dinner was interrupted by the approach of an elderly woman who had been feeding ducks nearby. Mrs. Patterson was a regular at the park, a retired librarian who took evening walks and had noticed the unusual dinner party. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I couldn't help noticing. Is everything all right?" Olivia looked up brightly. "We're having a picnic with Mr. Henry. He used to be a teacher, just like Miss Rodriguez at my school." Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted as she really looked at Henry for the first time. Something in his bearing, the way he spoke to Olivia, triggered a memory. "Henry," she said suddenly. "Henry Whitman. You taught my grandson Tommy about 10 years ago. You helped him learn to read when he was struggling so badly." Henry looked up in surprise. "Tommy Patterson?" With the red hair and freckles, he loved stories about dinosaurs. "That's him." Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. "You changed his life. He's in college now, studying to be a teacher because of how you inspired him." She paused, clearly struggling with what she was seeing. "Henry, what happened to you?" The story came out slowly, with Henry speaking quietly while Olivia continued eating, and Carmen listened with growing understanding. Mrs. Patterson sat on the grass beside their blanket, her own eyes wet with sympathy as she learned about Eleanor's death, the Parkinson's diagnosis, and the series of losses that had led to Henry's current situation. "This is unconscionable," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "A man who devoted his life to teaching children shouldn't be living on the streets. There has to be something we can do." Word of the impromptu dinner party began to spread in the way that meaningful stories do in small communities. Mrs. Patterson mentioned it to her daughter, who worked at the community center. The woman's daughter posted something on social media about the teacher who had helped her son years earlier. A jogger who had paused to watch the unusual scene told his wife, who was active in local volunteer organizations, Within a week, people began showing up at the park looking for Henry. A former student's mother brought him a warm coat. A man whose daughter had been in Henry's class years earlier offered to buy him lunch. The librarian at the branch near the park set aside a quiet corner where Henry could spend cold afternoons reading and staying warm. But perhaps the most significant development came from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had heard about Henry through the network of concerned community members. Dr. Walsh was the principal at Riverside Elementary, the same school where Henry had taught for decades. "I've been looking for you," she told Henry when she found him on his usual bench the following Saturday. "I have a proposition that I think might interest you." Olivia and Carmen arrived for their weekly picnic to find Henry in conversation with an official-looking woman, his expression cycling between hope and uncertainty. "Mr. Henry," Olivia called out, running toward him with the enthusiasm she showed for all her favorite people. "Are you going to have dinner with us again?" Henry smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Carmen had seen on his face. "I think so, sweetheart, and I think I might have some good news to share." Dr. Walsh's proposition was more generous than Henry had dared to hope for in his darkest moments. Riverside Elementary School was launching a new literacy intervention program for struggling readers, and they needed someone with experience, patience, and the kind of natural teaching ability that couldn't be taught in education courses. "We're offering you a part-time consultant position," Dr. Walsh explained as Henry, Carmen, and Olivia listened from their picnic blanket. 20 hours a week, working with small groups of children who are falling behind in reading. The pay would be enough to cover a modest apartment and basic living expenses, plus health benefits that would help with your medical care. Henry's hands shook more than usual as he processed what he was hearing. After months of feeling invisible and forgotten, the idea that his skills were still valued seemed almost impossible to believe. "Dr. Walsh, I appreciate this more than you can know," Henry said carefully. "But I need to be honest with you about my condition. The Parkinson's affects my fine motor control. My handwriting isn't what it used to be, and sometimes the tremor makes it difficult to handle materials." "Henry," Dr. Walsh said gently, "we're not asking you to write on chalkboards or manage complex paperwork. We're asking you to do what you've always done best. Help children discover that reading can be joyful instead of frustrating." She pulled out a tablet from her bag, showing him photos from other schools that had implemented similar programs. "Look at this. Small groups, comfortable seating, books chosen specifically for each child's interests and reading level. The focus is entirely on encouragement and building confidence." Olivia looked up from the cookie she was eating. "Mr. Henry, are you going to be a teacher again?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Henry replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a very kind offer, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this anymore." Carmen studied Henry's expression, recognizing the internal struggles she'd seen in her own mirror during her most difficult times. "What are you afraid of?" she asked quietly. Henry was silent for a long moment, watching ducks paddle across the pond's surface. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid of disappointing people. I'm afraid of not being good enough anymore. When I lost Eleanor, when I lost my health, when I lost my home, I started to believe that maybe I'd lost the part of myself that made me a good teacher." Dr. Walsh leaned forward. "Henry, do you know why Mrs. Patterson reached out to me about you?" He shook his head. "Because her grandson Tommy, who you taught 10 years ago, is now a sophomore in college studying elementary education. When she told him she'd found you, he asked her to give you a message." Dr. Walsh pulled out her phone and read from a text message. "Tell Mr. Whitman that I still have the bookmark he made for me when I finished my first chapter book. Tell him that every time I read to children during my volunteer work, I remember how he made me feel like reading was magic." Henry's eyes filled with tears, but he still looked uncertain. "I appreciate Tommy's kindness, and I'm grateful for your offer," he said. "But what if I can't do the work? What if my condition gets worse? What if I let down the children who need help? What if you don't try?" Olivia piped up with the directness that only children can manage. "Then you'll never know if you can help kids like Tommy learn to love reading." Carmen smiled at her daughter's wisdom, then addressed Henry directly. "When I was going through my divorce, I was offered a job training program that would have led to better work than what I have now. I turned it down because I was afraid of failing, afraid of not being smart enough, afraid of everything going wrong. She gestured around the park where they sat. This is why we have picnics here instead of going to restaurants. This is why Olivia's shoes are held together with duct tape. I chose fear over possibility, and I've regretted it every day since. Henry looked at this woman who had welcomed him into her family's dinner without hesitation, who had shown him kindness when he most needed it. What are you suggesting I should do? I'm suggesting, Carmen said gently, that you remember what you told Olivia about how chocolate makes everything better. Maybe taking chances does the same thing. Dr. Walsh stood up, leaving her business card on the picnic blanket. Henry, the offer stands for as long as you need to think about it. But I want you to know that this isn't charity. This is recognition of talent that our students desperately need. As Dr. Walsh walked away, Henry sat in silence holding the business card and watching Olivia share her cookies with the ducks that had waddled over from the pond. Mr. Henry, Olivia said suddenly, do you want to know a secret? What's that, sweetheart? Sometimes when I'm scared to try something new, Mama tells me to pretend I'm brave, until I really am brave. Maybe you could try that. Henry smiled, slipping the business card into his jacket pocket. Maybe I could, Olivia. Maybe I could. 2 weeks passed before Henry found the courage to call Dr. Walsh. During those 14 days, he continued his routine of sitting in the park, accepting meals from community members who had heard his story, and having dinner with Carmen and Olivia every Saturday evening. But something had changed in his demeanor. There was a spark of possibility that hadn't been there before. The call that changed everything came not from Henry, but from an unexpected source. Rebecca Martinez, a reporter for the local newspaper, had heard about Henry's story through the network of community connections that had formed around him. But Rebecca wasn't interested in writing another predictable piece about homelessness or community charity. She was intrigued by the deeper story of how a 6-year-old's simple invitation had begun to transform not just one man's life, but an entire community's understanding of dignity and worth. I'd like to write about what's been happening here, Rebecca told Carmen during a chance encounter at the park. Not just about Henry's situation, but about what Olivia's kindness has created. Would you be willing to share your story? The article that appeared in the Sunday edition of the paper was titled, A Dinner Invitation That Changed Everything. Rebecca had crafted a narrative that wove together Henry's background as a beloved teacher, his series of tragic losses, and the way a child's compassion had begun to rebuild not just his faith in humanity, but his sense of his own worth. The piece included quotes from former students, their parents, and colleagues who remembered Henry's dedication to helping struggling readers. Mrs. Patterson shared the story about her grandson, Tommy. Dr. Walsh discussed the literacy program and the search for the right person to lead it. But the heart of the article was Olivia's perspective, captured in her own words. Mister, Henry was sad and hungry, so I asked him to eat with us. Mama says sharing makes everything taste better, and she's right. Now Mr. Henry smiles when he sees me, and that makes me happy too. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By Monday morning, Dr. Walsh's office phone was ringing constantly. Former students were calling to share memories of how Henry had impacted their lives. Parents were asking about the literacy program and volunteering to support it. Local businesses were offering donations of books, furniture, and materials. But the most meaningful call came from an unexpected source. Dr. Walsh? This is David Chen from the State Education Department. I saw the article about Henry Whitman, and I wanted to talk to you about your literacy program. Dr. Walsh listened in amazement as David explained that the state was looking for pilot programs to address reading deficits in elementary schools. Henry's story, combined with his decades of experience and the community's support that had rallied around him, made Riverside Elementary an ideal candidate for significant funding and resources. We're prepared to offer a 3-year grant of $150,000 annually to develop a comprehensive literacy intervention program, David said, and we'd like Mr. Whitman to serve as the program coordinator with a salary commensurate with his experience and the importance of this work. That afternoon, Dr. Walsh found Henry on his usual bench in the park, reading a library book to Olivia while Carmen worked on her laptop nearby. Henry, Dr. Walsh said, barely able to contain her excitement, I need to talk to you about some developments. As she explained the grant opportunity and the expanded position, Henry's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief, to something that looked like hope tempered by years of disappointment. "Dr. Walsh, this is extraordinary, but I need to ask, is this happening because people feel sorry for me? Because they read the newspaper article and want to help the homeless teacher?" Dr. Walsh shook her head firmly. "Henry, this is happening because the state education department recognizes that you have 42 years of experience helping children learn to read. They're not offering you charity. They're offering you the chance to lead a program that could serve as a model for schools across the state." She pulled out the formal offer documents. "The position comes with a salary of $65,000 annually, full health benefits, and a housing allowance that would allow you to rent a comfortable apartment near the school. More importantly, you'd have the resources to hire additional reading specialists and create the kind of program you've always dreamed of." Olivia looked up from the book she'd been examining. "Mr. Henry, does this mean you're going to help lots of kids learn to read stories?" "I think so, sweetheart," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think that's exactly what it means." Carmen watched as Henry read through the documents, his hands steady for the first time since she'd known him. "You're going to say yes, aren't you?" Henry looked around the park where his life had been transformed, at the duck pond, where he'd sat in despair just weeks earlier, at the picnic blanket where a little girl had taught him that kindness still existed in the world. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'm going to say yes." The local news station picked up the story the following week, creating a segment about the power of community compassion and second chances. The footage showed Henry in his new office at Riverside Elementary, surrounded by colorful books and comfortable reading nooks, working with small groups of children who hung on his every word. But the image that resonated most with viewers was the final shot. Henry, Carmen, and Olivia having their Saturday picnic in the park, joined now by several of Henry's former students and their families, creating an impromptu community dinner that had grown from one child's simple invitation. The reporter's closing words captured the essence of what had occurred. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest gestures. A dinner invitation from a 6-year-old reminded an entire community that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and included. And in return, that community gained something precious, a reminder that kindness is never wasted, and that second chances can benefit everyone involved. As the camera pulled back to show the growing group of families sharing food and conversation in the golden afternoon light, Henry's voice could be heard reading aloud from a children's book, his words carrying clearly across the park. "And they all lived happily ever after because they remembered that the best stories are the ones we write together." How do you feel knowing the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Heroine so you never miss incredible stories like this one. 1 year later, the Henry Whitman Reading Center at Riverside Elementary School had become a model that educators from across the state came to observe and learn from. The bright, welcoming space was filled with cozy reading corners, each designed to make struggling readers feel safe and supported rather than judged or rushed. Henry, now 71 and healthier than he'd been in years, moved through the center with renewed purpose. His Parkinson's symptoms were better controlled thanks to consistent medical care. And while the tremor in his hands remained, it had never interfered with his ability to connect with children who needed encouragement. The program had helped over 200 students improve their reading skills, but more importantly, it had restored confidence in children who had begun to believe they weren't smart enough to succeed. Henry's patient approach, combined with the program's emphasis on finding the right book for each child's interests and reading level, had created an environment where learning felt like discovery rather than obligation. On this particular Saturday afternoon, the park where Henry's transformation had begun was hosting the first annual Community Reading Festival, an event that had grown from the connections formed around that original dinner invitation. Local authors read from their books under the oak trees. Teachers led story circles for children of different ages. Parents shared favorite family stories, while volunteers distributed free books donated by local businesses and community members. At the center of it all was a familiar blanket spread on the grass, where Carmen and Olivia, now 7 years old and a confident reader herself, were preparing another picnic dinner. But this time, they were joined by an extended family that had formed around shared meals and mutual support. Henry sat cross-legged on the blanket, helping a shy 4-year-old named Marcus sound out words in a picture book about trucks. Mrs. Patterson was there with her grandson Tommy, now a junior in college who volunteered with the reading program whenever he was home from school. Dr. Walsh had brought her own children, and several of Henry's current students had convinced their parents to join the community gathering. "Mr. Henry," Olivia said, settling beside him with a plate of sandwiches, "do you remember when you were sad and I asked you to have dinner with us?" Henry smiled, accepting the sandwich with hands that were steadier than they'd been in years. "I remember very clearly, sweetheart. That was the day you saved my life." "I didn't save your life," Olivia protested with 7-year-old logic. "I just shared my sandwich." "Sometimes," Henry replied, "sharing a sandwich is exactly the same thing as saving a life." Carmen watched this exchange while helping Tommy set up a reading station under a nearby tree. The young man who had once struggled with reading was now confidently leading a small group of children through an adventure story. His patience and encouragement clearly modeled on the teaching style he'd learned from Henry years earlier. "It's amazing how things come full circle," Carmen said to Dr. Walsh, who was arranging books for the festival's book exchange program. "It really is, Doctor," Walsh agreed. "Henry's program has a waiting list 3 months long now. Schools from 7 different districts have requested consultations about implementing similar programs. And it all started because your daughter saw someone who needed kindness." As the afternoon progressed and more families joined the impromptu community dinner, Henry found himself reflecting on the year that had passed. He had a comfortable apartment filled with books and photos from grateful students. He had meaningful work that used his skills and experience. Most importantly, he had rediscovered his sense of purpose and connection to a community that valued what he had to offer. But perhaps the greatest gift was the ongoing friendship with Carmen and Olivia, who continued their Saturday picnic tradition, even though Henry now had his own home and resources. Some traditions, they had all learned, were too precious to abandon just because circumstances improved. As the sun began to set and families started gathering their belongings, Olivia approached Henry with a serious expression. "Mr. Henry, next week, can we invite that lady who sits by herself near the playground? She looks like she might be hungry too." Henry looked toward the woman Olivia had noticed, recognizing in her posture the same invisible loneliness he had once carried. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Olivia. After all, we have plenty to share." Carmen smiled, realizing that her daughter had learned the most important lesson of all, that kindness is not a single act, but a way of seeing the world that creates endless opportunities to make a difference. A simple invitation to dinner can save a life, and a modest meal can open up an entire future. If you believe that kindness, no matter how small, can change someone's destiny, please subscribe to Hidden Heroine. Let's spread these heartwarming stories together.